Hello everyone, Master Xeon 101 here. Yesterday I was admiring this tweet by Toya of this particular model, as well as the regular version without the armor suit. It's just such a very lovely piece of work. So I spent some time yesterday kind of playing around with the idea, just messing around with it on the hop side, just trying to model it using hops and box cutter. And as I was messing with it, I realized it was a pretty good study. So I kind of ended up, kind of deviating into randomness, where I ended up taking it in a whole different direction after dicing and latticing and playing with everything. I was able to get this really interesting result. And I even played with camera cuts for a few hours on it, and it just seemed like it would be a really good modeling exercise to talk to you guys about. Of course, I could, sit here and model the entire thing and be talking about that process, but instead, I wanted to just kind of keep it brief and focus on just one part to hopefully have everyone who's watching this walk away with a little bit more additional hardops knowledge and understanding to help you on your adventure. Of course, I mean box cutter as well. With this thing, I ended up setting up all sorts of cameras to just experiment with varying types of drivers and keyframes while also transitioning back into the 360. I got this idea for something called a quick add or one shot or something. I don't know, I'm still pondering the idea, but I think I could come up with a way to create a commercialized experience, just one click. And so it is something that I'm just currently pondering. I'm allowing this animation to just at least play through before we get in and begin. So, I apologize for this being a slightly longer entrance than usual, but I've also been experimenting lately with rendering things out with additional keyframes. Normally I constrain things to be only certain amounts of keyframes. This time I'm actually trying out the concept of, going for multiple thousands of frames and then seeing where I get to. Let's go ahead and begin. I'll press Control N and we'll just make a new file. And typically for these sort of parts, I eyeball things. However, we'll bring in an image as a plane. So I have a hotkey to bring up my screenshots. So, for modeling something like this, my favorite screenshot application is, of course, Share X. So I actually have a hotkey on my keyboard for, selecting things and making screenshots. So in this case, I'll use something called a freehand tool. And just for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to grab just this element with nothing else around it. And we can get rid of peer ref and put that back on the side, which I'll be looking at the whole time. Let's try that again. New file, delete the cube, and we'll just drag and drop this image onto Blender. And that's actually the desired result. So typically I use reference images until I no longer am using reference images. So, at some point they become a little bit more of a constraint than they are a benefit to model. And unlike yesterday, I actually used Ngon, but today I'll opt to use a single vert. And we'll just rotate the ref until we get it just in position. And the goal this time is something a little bit more accurate to the source, since I always deviate when it comes to these sort of things. I'll just be modeling from a ref, and then I'll just kind of experiment with what knowledge I've gained from such shapes. So we'll select all the verts after being filled and just fill that face. And we can select this plane and just put a solidify and press 2 in order to push it up and down at the same time, giving us an equal thickness. And if we look through this at the ref, we can see that our work is cut out for us. But really it's not. First thing I will do is show you guys my modifier panel, so that way you can see me press Control A and visual geometry to mesh, and you can watch me press Alt X to change to bisect at the top, and everything else is default. In fact, if you ever need to get to your default mirror settings, you just press X and it will default you to default, in which case now I can then set this to be bisect and modifier, and we'll just split that, which visually shows nothing, but in edit mode half of the mesh is fake. And we can begin making larger edits. For these sort of things, normally non-destructive is your friend until it's no longer your friend. So a lot of decisions you'll see me just make just one and done, because there is no particular chance I see of going back and making changes at a high level. For example, with this particular bevel, that bevel's done. One of the reasons I'm doing a video on this today is because of this edge. An amateur Blender or hardops user would definitely come in and try to bevel this edge, and things will not work out. Me personally, in my line of work, I actually have a technique that I tend to go to for dealing with such angles, and what I'll do is press K to go into knife, and we just want to rotate it till we kind of hotline this point in the corner, like so. I know this is a really weird workflow, so we will just K until we knife this point in the corner, and it looks like we were off a little bit because we got this extra edge, but we'll press Ctrl X and dissolve it. And with the skewed edge kind of flowing against this, it means that we can grab this piece and press Ctrl B and just bevel it. And now we actually have that bevel in. Of course, these sort of areas will be problematic later, so that's why I'm opting to dissolve certain geometry in order to just kind of keep that area clean and flowing. The next thing is, in this area, we also have kind of the same thing going. So I'll press K, and we want to rotate it just right. You know, we have to choose between, do we want this absolute polygonal accuracy, or do we want to be constrained to the reference? And in this case, I'm actually going to choose to be constrained to the ref a little bit. You can see I've deviated just a slight amount, but you know, that's like I said, par for the course. There's always going to be a bit of deviation when it comes to me. I refer to it as my individuality, but you can just call it inaccuracy, where I will just make certain design calls over the course of modeling something because I know in the future it's going to look either simplistic or blocky. So that's really part of why I'm even working with these edges. The other thing is talking about forcing a flow. So if we try to use a loop cut, things aren't going to flow. But if we press K and then C and then Z to cut through, we can actually begin cutting through this shape, and I could slide this over. But the benefit of forcing such a knife cut through over here is that I now have a vertical edge flow, and I could use that to my advantage by just putting a loop here and then just sliding it away. And then of course at the top, we may want to slide it even more away. And at the bottom, we may want to experiment with the amount of offset that we give this. However, I did see this issue coming, and according to the reference image, it looks like we would better be served going at this from this side. So I'll press K, and we'll press C to constrain it. We'll press Z to cut through. I could just use the knife box, but sometimes I just go for the tool that will get me there the quickest. So it's not even a matter of product placement, it's just a matter of which tool will help us survive to the end of the day. So there's a couple of ways I could create a very even sized gap. I'm going to first try using inset. May not be the smartest idea. We'll press B in order to utilize the border, and we'll just inset that, see what we get, maybe dissolve that edge. And we see that we've definitely broken some things down here. So let's press SY0. An alternative to pressing SY0 is pressing Q and going in edit mode and using flatten. And I generally will roll the wheel. It appears that I need to get that fixed to work both ways. So first I will snap it down to this vert, and then we'll just pull that over, just getting us our even look, but we have this nice little spacing now, and there's even an edge flow in there for us to utilize if needed, in which case we will utilize that. We can select both of these and choose to inset it. However, I think at this point, because it's so close to this edge, that would be a little detrimental. So we'll put a loop here and then put a loop and press Alt S to push that inwards. And you know, while Alt S can get a little bit weird, as long as you keep the geo simple for blocking things in, as what I'm doing here, you can always get in and take advantage of your polygon control of having simple geo. However, I am just not liking that look. So I'm just gonna undo that and just keep undoing. You know, let's really press our luck with the power of undo. And let's think about what we wanna do here. So if we look at the image, we can see that, you know, maybe this deviation became a little problematic. You know, the easiest way to really solve it once and for all would be for us to just split this and call it a day, but I'm not at that stage yet. The next stage is actually getting the circle in here. So to celebrate the new circle, or, you know, the revamp of the old circle, we will just cut a few loops in here, seemingly random, and it looks like we were off target a little bit. So we'll just dissolve those two. Let's do this again. And we'll just jump across. But I don't want to jump into this sloped area that's happening here, because that's going to be a different discussion. In video 2, we'll go over that and how to get past such gradients on it. Just kidding. We're going to cover that in less than 5 minutes. Probably right now. I'll press I. In fact, let's look at this circle I just generated. We can scroll to adjust the circle segment, so we can get a little bit more rounded a circle than that. Really just pressing the limits there. And we could even grab this and extrude it out, but I'm not going to do that just yet. We'll return to that before I begin deviating again. So with knife, we will just grab that single point, and from there we will create an empire. You know, when I'm looking at references, straight pixels and stuff like that, and extra outlines, these things all kind of speak to me in the form of hallucinations that I sometimes act on. You know, nothing gruesome or anything, but they show me forms that could be, and I'll go after them. So, you know, you got to watch it with random lines and images, because you'll show them to me and I'll try to model that stuff and I'll go insane, and then I'll also dislike you. If I were using the latest Blender, I believe I would have destructive extrude, which would be a good time to show this. I could have also used edit mode to set up this scenario, but I'm also trying to control the topology at the same time. So we'll press E and just bring that down, and we'll select this edge and just dissolve it. And while things look a little bit out of control here, we'll just delete these faces and just refill that. That's probably the easiest way to get past that issue. The next thing is, you know, now we have our gradient into the model exactly where we want it. So I can already tell you that if we sharpen this and we start transitioning into an auto smooth, this will be problematic. And to show that in action, I could just jump into sharpen and you can see the shading kind of break down. So for solving this yesterday, personally, I ended up just putting a nice little bevel here, and that gave enough of a geometric transition for the normal smoothing to get a slightly more appropriate result. And then, as always, I get rid of the most skewed of edges, because those will cause us issues with the bevel later. Another terrible tip from me is that, you know, sometimes at the very end, I just don't even bother with caring about the geometry anymore. I refer to it as, you know, the art of corner cutting. You know, if you cut corners that people can see, then it will decrement the quality of your work. However, I have a theory that in the greatest artists, that they all just cut corners that no one will see, and that's how they get through their work quick and just survive the day and each client without, you know, pulling their hair out. And, you know, I've been trying that in my own work, where I just offset the laziness factor of things when I'm working. We can also see that this skewed edge caused a little bit of issues with the shading. We could dissolve it and that would resolve it. We could dissolve it and that would resolve it. Got a bit of a rhyme there. So let's continue on. And when you really look at these models compared to the reference images, to me, they always feel a little simple, which I'm not complaining about. I'm definitely thankful for this artist keeping it simple. In fact, I'm beginning to think that this bevel is just too extreme. So I'm going to just unsubdivide this manually in the worst way. There we go. Manually unsubdivided, or manually unbeveled. And we'll just bring this up, dissolve that point, or actually merge it at this one at last. And we could make a couple of choices here. We could choose to leave this fairly generic, which I just can't do, or we can just bevel it again, learning no lesson, sharpening it, and it's a little bit simpler, but at least now we can really work on this shape. So there's an edge already going across, and this edge will be the one that holds our form. If this edge wasn't here, whenever I press knife and I begin doing this random shape, well, random to me, probably not to the awesome artist who made this, we can see that it corrected by just placing the most skewed location. And that's kind of a long way to show a example. I'm actually looking at the timer on the screen and panicking. I don't want to go on too long. Also, a delivery just arrived. But I did want to do a video talking about how I approach hops and use it on a project level. So right now I'm doing content just kind of helping people get acquainted with Hops Cutter, but afterwards I definitely want to transition into content that is more about hops in action and the reasons that hops is made the way it's made and and how I personally use it in my own work. So we'll just bevel these, we'll keep it simple with a single point. And we're just beveling these points, just Control-Shift-B to bevel a vertice. We could have selected them all and done it, but in the case of such variable thickness, I probably want to try that manually. With this particular shape, we will go ahead and use the new feature of, where is it? Booleans, selection to Boolean. And we want to lower the inset depth immensely. Maybe it's something like that. And then if we go in object mode, we can see that our Boolean is set up on this particular mesh. Selection of Boolean was added by ST3 kind of just as an experiment as far as his contribution to the mesh tools of Boolean. So it's just one of the kind of rites of passage on the way into hops, or on the way through hops as a new guy. We'll select this edge, and I could either bevel it manually because I already know that this shape is pretty much in the bag, but we'll just hit it with the control click on mark to bevel that. We'll grab this edge and we'll control click mark to bevel that. Just having some fun here. Of course, if your bevel's not showing up correctly, you want to control A and apply your scale. That can be a bit problematic at times. And I'm still looking at this and dancing around the idea of just getting that edge in there without splitting it. I could split it, but sometimes you might notice in videos that I don't opt for splitting. And sometimes it's because it's just not time yet, as weird as that sounds. In fact, what we'll do is the same classic trick as before, C, Z to cut through, which means that all of this has now become quads and we can just force an edge flow in there. So I know these are kind of some odd tricks, but I've been modeling this way for years of just trying to really get my head wrapped around ingons and what treasures they offer. Like I find that there's an endless bounty to, having a deep understanding of ingons. And I'm sure there's people out there who are master ingon modelers. And if there are, I would love to meet them and just talk about various polygonal occurrences that I find to be either soothing or nuances or very special or interesting, or just a curiosity of ingons. People spend so much time debating on whether or not ingons are good for games or good for your work that you don't ask yourself if ingons are good for you. And the answer is yes, they can be good for you. Maybe sometimes I'm used to my head about the idea of doing a kind of answer to Gleb's course, talking about just how to live with ingons and how ingons just aren't such bad guys. They just got a bad rap, especially when you try to unwrap, polygon pun, I'll see my way out now. We can select this edge, and even though this is like just this ingon mess, we'll dissolve that edge just to avoid a problem. In case you're wondering what that problem would have been, it would have been me beveling this edge and getting that. So sometimes you could see a problem coming, like a flashpoint paradox, and just remove it. And we'll actually control mark that, and I'll press 1 to set that to profile 0.5 because personally I love having my profile at 0.7. Users who don't like it just don't get how much 0.5 can mess with shading and beveling other bevels, but I do like to bevel at 0.7 by default, and then always just have a hotkey to change the profile on the fly. For this one, even though this isn't in the concept, we're just going to create a ring in the middle. You know, I have to extrapolate and assume that's what the artist might have wanted. So with that, we've pretty much modeled this piece. So you can kind of see why I went on a random thing with it yesterday, as far as just taking this in a completely different direction. I can see that there's a little bit of a lip just right there. So we might as well just knock that out. Also, I must apologize for this video being 20 minutes. Eventually, I will stop apologizing for that because, you know, if you got time constraints, you probably shouldn't be watching videos. You should be dealing with your constrained time. My day is constrained 10 different ways. In fact, the moment this video is off, I must spend the rest of the day pretending to not be working so that my girlfriend doesn't hate me. So these latest couple of releases have been a little taxing. I mean, on her, not so much on me. A little bit on me with the type of complaints I have to deal with sometimes. But definitely gotta spend a little more time relaxing, which to me means testing hops. Working on hops requires that I'm yelling at people for 12 hours a day and waking up after no sleep and checking up on people and managing multiple crews. Is just insane. I will never complain about software development ever again in my life. So this is our shape, pretty much. I mean, I could just keep going and just model more and more and more of this thing, but really this is our shape. A couple of things I did yesterday when it came to getting this to its final result is, firstly, we can, I like to actually duplicate at this point and then hide a duplicate, then hide the reference. So it looks a little bit blocky, kind of dense, to be honest. So for that reason, we can actually use Smart Apply, but really Smart Apply is not needed because even the last bevel isn't needed on this. So sometimes Smart Apply is only there for when you have a very complicated modifier situation. In this case, it's not a complicated modifier situation, so Smart Apply is probably going to not work out for you because Smart Apply is there for the tough times. So under Mesh Tools in the Q menu, we'll just hit a little dice on it, and instead of dicing it horizontally like I did yesterday, taking it in a completely different universe, we will just dice it like so. But, you know, to be honest, we'll also dice it on the X just to, actually, let's not dice it on the X. Let's focus on the Y, and it's been diced, and then we dice it again, but we focus on the X in order to give it an adequate amount of segments. Someday dice will have individual axial dicing where you can choose how many dices happen on each axis individually when doing multi-dice. So now we have the shape diced. And you might be wondering, like, hey, why'd you just dice that thing that you spent so long kind of modeling meticulously? And that is so we can use our old friend Q, go under Add Modifier, and just hit Lattice. Sometimes I get a little menu blind speaking out loud to myself. Lattice. Lattice's placement might be altered in the future to make it more optimal, since Lattice is just such a good friend to us. Out of all the modifiers in Blender, Lattice remains the fastest, has never gotten slow, never had a complaint about Lattice, just saying. I am a big fan of lattices. In fact, Box Cutter is almost a homage to the potential of what a lattice can do. So now we've rounded this shape out a little bit, and we could always go into Modifier and take this to a more extreme level, like something like that if wanted, or even, you know, dial it back to something reasonable. But that is the shape in a nutshell. So as far as shading goes, me personally, I always opt to just take an area and just mark it sharp, just to prevent any sort of shading mishaps. Also, now that we have this dice going on, we could actually dissolve some of our support geo that isn't actually needed. So we'll go ahead and just get rid of that and dissolve it, and so far so good. Also, that piece is no longer needed. If we dissolve that piece, we can alt select the rest of this and mainly get rid of that. Some things just aren't needed. So now we have better shading happening in this area. For this one, we have one entire extra loop that isn't needed. I always tend to go back and just remove these extra things that dice does. In fact, as much as dice isn't subdivision, there are some similarities between dice and subdivision where, you know, even after applying subdivision, I find myself dissolving geometry that isn't needed. So to complete this model, we will just material scroll through combinations, but we can't see what combinations we got. And in fact, to scroll through combinations, I'm literally pressing Alt-M and control clicking on blank material scroll. And if we press tab, we can go to render where we just find a material close to what we like. And you know, I'll just use an S sharpen in order to use seams, which are set in the Control tilde menu to basically mark these areas and isolate them. And that allows me to press 3 and then press L to hover over these. And we can just go inside of Q and edit mode and just blank material scroll until we get something dark and powerful. And we can go to this area and maybe even dissolve that one just a little bit. But to do that, we need to really clear out some rubbish here. That should do. And then this time we will go into material scroll, but we'll control click it, but we'll press T to switch over to emission, and we'll just scroll it till we get something blue, dabba dee dabba die. I mean, normally we just go for something blank, but this time I want something very specific. And so I selected these two faces. I'll just press F to just make that a one-click selection next time. And we can go here and just hit it with a modifier scroll as well. To finally top this off and bring it together, we could control click bevel to add a bevel. And you can see these problematic areas in the back where it's just not going to let such things happen. I'll press L to switch the limit method to weight, which will just make our lives a little bit easier. And we can make the hard decision of just unmarking that area, keeping things simple, and we'll just make it to the end of the day that way. In fact, I feel like there are still some doubles being created in here. So maybe something like that. I could also use decal, or not decal machine, mesh machine, in order to transfer these normals. But that's a talk for another day. So we can select these pieces here, grow by 1, and under our materials, we just want to assign the last material that was created. And here we are looking at our shape. In fact, I can press RX, just scale this up. We can Alt X. This time we want to mirror using new modifier. In the latest version of hardops, we now have it dealing with the weighted normal sort, I believe, but we'll just add a weighted normal just at the end to just bring it all together. And so there's a couple of areas that definitely have my curiosity. So we could handle these a couple of ways. One of my favorite ways is something called resharp, which is part of sharpen as an Easter egg. Resharpen was one of the first rejected features of hops, where if you control shift click it, it will basically resharpen and recalculate your mesh, allowing you a kind of second chance at getting your sharpening right. And so some edges didn't need to be marked on the inside to work with weight. And so that's why we see it being capable of fixing it. Here we see two verts a little too close together, which was causing some issues with the booleans and with the bevel and the shading. So that's been removed. And if we just take a look at this from the side, we can see that this is our part. In fact, I kind of went a little overboard here. I could grab that and scale it in order to make it just shade a little bit easier. But for the purposes of actually wrapping on this, let's look at our modifiers. We want to keep these mods in their order, or really doesn't matter at this point. We can just draw a box, and you can see it lagging so bad on the screen. And so why is it lagging? Well, we'll press F4, go to preferences, and we can see under the display tab of box cutter that my FPS is set to 3. We got to set that to 144, guys. You know, if you go in and your refresh rate set to 3, you're in for a bad time. And I actually did that last night to kind of set up a situation to show how slow box cutter could be. But I also wanted to emphasize how we're definitely taking steps forwards towards improving speeds. across the tool altogether, and exposing the shader FPS was the first step, even if it is possibly to our detriment. So placing the Boolean so high up maybe wasn't the smartest choice. In fact, probably where it was placed was actually probably the smartest choice. We slap a weight normal on that, we slap a weight normal on that, and we almost lost our transition of this because we don't have the bevel and the Boolean connecting. And I'll go in local mode because I just have suspicions that this mesh isn't manifold. So we'll select it, go under select loops, select boundary loops. The mesh appears to be ironclad. And what it is because we're now working under weight, this new Boolean isn't going to take weight into consideration. So we press A, or actually L, to switch our limit method back to angle. And by just rolling our angle in, we now have that transition showing between our slice that everyone knows and loves. And we could do the same thing with this one, just pressing L to switch back to the limit method of angle. And we just roll it in just a little bit, even for reasons that aren't entirely clear. We'll just merge these three because it's right in front of us, you know. And that is it. We have basically made this part. And really looking at this, I could just go insane on just adding additional details from here. But I just wanted to kind of show some basic modeling with hops just in a nutshell. In fact, after the resharp, I still feel the urge to go and override the sharpening here. Sometimes instead of having just strange wonky shading, it's just easier to just mark it as sharp and call it a day. However, even angle is going to be working against us here. So it's not entirely ready for the close-up. We'll need to bring this bevel in just a little bit. When it comes to these advanced angles, bevel can struggle with some of the bigger amounts. So that's really up to you, the user, as far as how much struggling you want to have with things. But me, being a bit of a polygonal mystery solver, I do enjoy getting in here and trying to understand how to best shade a mesh without using normal transfer. Not that I have anything against it, it's just I feel it is a rather heavy-handed hack to get things done. And you can get pretty much perfect results with it, but I also believe that there's some topological things that could be solved that could also get us somewhere in that same ballpark. So in case you're ever wondering why I model the way I do. But with that, we could just wrap up this video, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. You know, I just want to do just kind of a quick modeling session just to talk about some basic modeling stuffs with hardops, and of course we can just press Alt V, switch through different lighting setups until we find just a perfect shot for us. In fact, as I'm looking at this, I'm like, man, you know, modeling from reference just never cuts it for me. I always feel the need to just go off the rails on this. In fact, we can select this thing at the very end, make the material white, lower the metallicity, maybe play with our roughness a little bit. And I don't know, even in EVHQ, just rendering white things just don't give me a whole lot of definition. But it could be that it's, you know, more of a off-white, more of a gray. And then sometimes everything just appears to have metallicity to my eyes. But with that, we can wrap up this video, and I'll see you guys next time.